Hi, I'm Brian DeShazer, Director of the Pacifica Radio Archives, the oldest and largest collection of public radio programming in the United States. And welcome to From the Vault, our weekly series that takes that history out of the vault and back on the radio. In this edition of From the Vault, we present our earliest known recording of Japanese Americans and their families living in California talking about life in America. The year was 1959, and KPFA in Berkeley, California opened its doors and its microphones to welcome the Japanese Americans to tell their stories.
I stayed in the first grade about 2 or 3 days. Well, at the end of about 1 month, they put me up to, I think it was 5th grade. When I was about 18, my father went back to Japan. From there on, I couldn't go to school, so I had to quit school and work myself.
The Japanese began to immigrate to America by large numbers in the late 1880s through the early 20th century. By 1942, there were 127,000 Japanese Americans living in the continental United States, and of those, 112,000 were living on the West Coast. This is the classic example of the American dream, an immigrant group working hard, raising their families, and making an effort to assimilate and make contributions to their new home country. That all changed following the Imperial Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which brought the United States into World War II full throttle. Soon after that event, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942, authorizing the internment of all the 112,000 Japanese living on the West Coast. This extraordinary act of wartime hysteria and racism would only be officially acknowledged when President Ronald Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act of 1988, which provided $20,000 to surviving detainees and their heirs, totaling $1.6 billion. But now we turn to our extraordinary recording of Japanese Americans and their families from 1959, talking about family life before the war and how the internment process changed their lives forever. This program was produced by Marshall Windmiller from Pacifica station KPFA 94.1 in Berkeley, California. You will hear from ordinary citizens, teachers, students, lawyers, architects, and farmers. But you'll also hear from Hito Akado, one of the founders and past presidents of the oldest and largest Asian civil rights group. It was called Japanese America Citizens League, and it was founded in 1929. We're proud to present Marshall Windmiller's program, Japanese in California, from 1959.
Pacifica Foundation presents The Japanese in California, one of a series of programs dealing with racial minorities, produced by KPFA Berkeley under a grant from the Columbia Foundation.
There are only about 160,000 Japanese in the United States, and most of them live on the West Coast. They refer to themselves as the Issei, Nisei, and Sansei. That is the first, second, and third generations. The Issei began coming to America in the 1890s, but their numbers were greatly limited by legislation designed to keep out Orientals. Only their children, born in this country, are citizens. The program you are about to hear makes no attempt to exhaust the subject or to recite all the facts of history. It is rather a verbal montage of the characteristics of a group and an attempt to convey something of the feeling of what it is like to be a Japanese in California.
I dreamed about America, heard quite a bit from my father, and I sure wanted to come over here and see what kind of a country it is, you know.
Led by that dream, this Issei came, as we or our ancestors all came to America, to face the day-to-day facts of existence on foreign soil. Each of the many voices you will hear speaks not only for an individual, but for countless others like him, sharers of the dream, participants in the events. Who can say how much the dream helped to create the reality?
Well, when I first came, there wasn't very many Japanese boys to go to school. And most of the people were old men, no women folks, you know. And well, everywhere you go, you didn't see, you just see a man, a Japanese, no families or no of their own house to live in. So the first thing when I came over here, I had to stay with friends. A couple of years after I came over here, women started to come in. I stayed in the first grade about 2 or 3 days. So the second grade, third grade, well, at the end of about 1 month, they put me up to, I think it was 5th grade. Well, I stayed in an American family. I stayed in as a schoolboy, and of course I studied pretty hard there. And I was old, too old to be with a first, second, or third grade, you see. I think that was the reason that they put me up in upper grade. My father was working, and only way I had to work and help him too. So I had to go in as a houseboy. When I was about 18, my father went back to Japan. And from there on, I couldn't go to school, so I had to quit school and work myself.
Say that in Stockton there was a hub in the downtown area which would be comparable to the what they call Japanese town in San Francisco. And my father was, he built I think he was the first Japanese, immigrant to build his own home in Stockton. And in so doing, we moved, more or less to the outskirts of town. It was still what you would consider the wrong side of the tracks, but it was an area in which he was able to, obtain a lot and build a home. The neighborhood was, as I recall now, was predominantly an Italian neighborhood, and they didn't seem to mind. Then many Japanese families moved into the area, and I grew up in a neighborhood that was, within 4 or 5 block radius, I imagine there must have been 20 Japanese families, and the rest of the families were probably of Italian origin.
You know, it's just something that you know that you're different and that you're somehow not part of the community. And I guess you feel it more in in a rural community. My brothers, however, can distinctly remember being stoned and this kind of thing when they were growing up. But it was less open. You led 2 different lives, I recall. You went to school with them and you engaged in all kinds of activity with them in the school. But once you were out of school, then the line was clearly drawn. You never saw each other socially. It was just very, very clear. And you left it at school. All this idea of democracy is just forgotten the minute you leave the school.
Well, I think in those days I didn't mind it too much, although the minorities, Negroes, Mexicans, Chinese, and Japanese were in a somewhat segregated part of town. The schools weren't segregated, however, and I hadn't given great thought to the human relations in those days. But thinking back on it, I did realize that although I had Caucasian friends, we never invited them to our home, nor was I invited to theirs.
I lived on a farm, truck farm, dirt farm. And I grew up during the Depression. I was a kid during the Depression, a young kid. And my friends, it was sort of an intermixed community, and there was Mexicans, and we didn't play with too much. It was a rural community, and neighborhoods were far. Our closest neighbor was another Japanese family about, maybe 3/4 of a mile away. And whenever we did play with anyone, we played with them, which was maybe once a month. There was Japanese families, say, within a radius of 3-4 miles, who sort of had a community of their own. And they were quite a few of them, let's say about half the old men were quite nationalistic. And they tried to carry on Japanese traditions and ceremonies and so on. They had a Japanese school.
Please.
This class is we call Buddhist Japanese class. We start with a short ceremony with the gassho. Gassho is this salutation to the Buddha, and also end with the gassho. And the main purpose of this class is to give them some religious knowledge through language acquaintance, because many terminologies in Buddhism are mostly untranslatable, hard to translate. We can't find a very adequate or suitable word in English. So sometimes using original Japanese or original Sanskrit Chinese word are more convenient. So in that point, we feel the necessity of giving the small children the knowledge of Japanese. So our purpose is to give the religious education as well as language knowledge. So we call this Buddhist Japanese class.
I notice in our church where the minister speaks Japanese, a lot of the sanseis can't understand it. So the trend is now to obtain English-speaking ministers for these Buddhist churches in order that the sanseis will be able to understand.
I do feel that language is something that we should maintain in some form or another, at least in terms of talking. Maybe not so much reading, but at least talking, which I'm not very good at, and I could get by, but I mean, I certainly could learn a lot more than I already know. With the older generation, you can get by speaking half Japanese and half English.
I have many friends who speak Japanese only. I have a friend who was educated in Japan. I have a friend who came from Japan after the war. And I have a friend who is so-called war bride. There are many people who speak Japanese rather than English. But my association is, I say, about 50-50. No, but about 70 English speaking and Jerry, Japanese speaking.
All of my children speak English because it's hard for me to teach right now. If I talk to Japanese to them, it's all right, but I try to speak English, and if I speak Japanese between them, I don't think too good, so I try to speak in English now. And then since they're speaking English outside anyway, but I like them to learn Japanese. So my oldest boy is going to be 6, so I once in a while I try to teach them him. He's interesting too, and he copies what I say.
I'm not living with my parents now. It's just my wife and my child. And my wife doesn't speak too much, and of course it's a chore trying to get my little girl to speak. But I've maintained it through my parents and through the years that I attended Japanese school in the city. And the Issei people that I'm fortunate enough to get in contact with, through them I seem to maintain my knowledge of the language.
I don't know this is bad or good. The Japanese is #1 people who forget about Japanese language. So you see, especially compared with the Chinese or other Spanish-speaking people, most other people, even second or third generation, speak very fluent mother language. But this Japanese generation, already second generation, their knowledge of Japanese are very poor, so very fast to forget. That means in one point very bad, but in another point their assimilation is very good, I think.
In 1941, there were 112,000 Japanese on the Pacific coast. 2/3 of them were American citizens. By the end of 1942, they had all been forced to leave their jobs, give up their homes and businesses, and be interned behind barbed wire. They had not been charged with any crime. They had merely had Japanese ancestors. And on December 7th, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy had attacked Pearl Harbor, and the United States had gone to war with Japan.
Playing golf that morning, and when I came home noontime, I heard about it. I didn't dream that we would be evacuated. I thought that as American citizens that we would be protected in this way. We thought maybe the alien Japanese would be evacuated, but not the citizens. And we felt it was quite discriminatory because the Italians and the Germans were enemies too, and the East Coast was just as vulnerable. There were submarines lurking in that area, but they never moved any of them because they were strong, they settled in that area. They had influence and influential people backing them. And then we were here for some time, but then we were evacuated to Tanforan, the stables of Tanforan there. Stayed there for some time, and we shipped to Topaz, Utah, where I stayed for a while, but I was one of the first to leave and go to Chicago, where we were more or less in free territory to live our own lives.
Well, I didn't like it because why Japanese alone? How about the German and Italian? They was in the same situation. But because we are, so-called Orientals, and flat nose, and funny eyes, we were kicked out of the state. Not because Japan was close to the Pacific coast, I don't believe. The German or Italian or any other group could have done the same damage if they wanted to for the national security, but they weren't kicked out. And I went to one of those, assembly centers. I didn't like it, of course. The first chance I had was to go to Idaho to work in a farm. So I grabbed that chance and I went to Idaho, work in a farm. Most during the summertime and autumn, and then winter time they didn't have too much work. So I went into one of those, camp. From there I volunteered for the army, of course, at the Army Language School to become an interpreter, or some language, language thing. Then I went overseas, stationed in Guam, and for a little while I was working on one of those radio stations, listening to the, Japanese radios, and then Japanese Army and Navy radios and those things. And there's a chance came, and so I was able to volunteer for the flight over or around the Japanese islands. I volunteered for that. I guess I flew close to 100 hours flight time. And then one day I got wounded in Iwo Jima. So after that, I was in the hospital, and then they sent me back to the hospital over here in the state. I got discharged. And as soon after I got discharged, I got the job I got now.
A terrible thing. That's the thing that I felt about it. And I was working my way through school, and I was staying at the dean's place, and we had an idea that we were going to be moved. And the dean would not believe me when I would say we were leaving, that I thought we would have to be moved or something. And I remember the time that, it was toward the end of the semester, and the Army posted these things on the thing, and that was the first time I found out about it. And I remember running into the dean's office and saying, I have to make arrangements to leave. And the dean would not believe it until we dragged him out and showed it to him, and then he realized this was it. And then there was no time really to think about it, because we just had to leave very quickly. And you couldn't, in this small community, show any sympathy. You'd be ostracized. And there was one white boy that went to school with us. He studied Japanese with us. And the poor fellow had to leave because he felt sympathetic toward us. It's kind of an interesting thing. He's not living anymore, unfortunately. I can remember feeling like I was in a dream world, that all of this wasn't true. I felt like I was in a daze for months, it seemed like. And in a way, we weren't prepared for it, because my folks were prepared for it. They said they would be moved, but they didn't dream for 1 minute that we would be moved. The children would be moved. And I guess what you call repressing it, because all I remember was it's kind of a nightmare, and that's the kind of a feeling that I had.
In the relocation centers, there were some that didn't cooperate. And there was a group, the so-called renunciants, that renounced their citizenship. But they were American citizens, many of them, but those who had been sent back to Japan when they were young, and they had a lot of the Japanese ideas, and they thought this is a very bad thing to do, and a lot of them rebelled and were very bitter. I think as a group, those people were more bitter about it than we were, that have been born and raised all our lives in this country. There were a lot of hotheads in that group, and in fact, a lot of them took to violence, and there were a lot of, for instance, officers in the JACL that were beaten up and things of that type. When we first went in the centers, there was quite a resentment against the JACL because they thought that we had sold them down the river into the relocation centers. But I think now that they'll realize that the JACL did the right thing, and they've done a wonderful job since the war.
We were rather naive. We knew we were American citizens, but nobody else knew that, and we weren't, we didn't realize that. And so what happened was that when the war came, that's exactly the situation in which we found ourselves, that certain people who had worked among us, church people and other people whom we had befriended in the course of our growing up, and our parents had, knew us, but it was still a rather small minority of people who really knew us and understood us. But as far as the general public is concerned, they had no idea that we were Americans. Our loyalty was to this country, and least of all our own government. And I would say generally, I talk about the Japanese problem on the Pacific coast, California, but it was a localized problem, you see. In 1940, I think we slowly began to realize that what Japan was doing in Manchuria and China did reflect upon us. And I remember in Los Angeles we set up a speakers bureau. That was 1940. You see, we could see that people identified us with Japan and the people of Japan. So we set up a speakers bureau, going to speak to church groups, women's clubs, service organizations, as many as we could cover, outlining our position that we were Americans, our loyalty was to America, that to us Japan was a foreign country, you see. That was, of course, we realized we were American citizens, and when this talk about evacuating us came up, why, I mean, we didn't take it too seriously at first. We said, well, they couldn't evacuate us. We're American citizens, you see. But it happened. And even today, people ask us, how could that be possible? Because being citizens, you see, we have certain rights. In fact, there was a lot of talk at the time, even when evacuation became quite definite, as to what course we should take, whether we should fight for our rights and stay on the West Coast, or whether we should cooperate with the government in its program of evacuating us from the West Coast. And I would say that the primary consideration in all this thing, as far as we are concerned, is the fact that our parents, not being able to become American citizens, they were aliens ineligible for citizenship. So overnight they became enemy aliens, you see, through no fault of their own. We could hardly say, well, we're going to fight to stay here. We're Americans. We don't care what happens to our parents, you see. And that was, I think, the biggest factor that helped us determine what our course would be. Of course, there again, although we saw it differently, I mean, other people felt that our taking all this was almost an admission of some close relationship with the people of Japan. From our standpoint, we felt that maybe this is our peculiar contribution to America's war effort.
You are listening to Japanese in California, a 1959 documentary produced for KPFA by Marshall Windmuller in 1959. If you'd like more information about this documentary or to get the complete recording, give us a call at 1-800-735-0230, or you can visit us online at fromthevaultradio.org. This program was discovered as part of a grant project we did with the American Archive funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, highlighting civil rights recordings. As we looked at the civil rights that were addressed by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, we saw a lot of areas that were missed. And in addition to the African American civil rights, Latino Chicana civil rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, Japanese American rights, we also were able to influence and contribute to the idea of disability rights, mental patients' rights, and other rights that have been championed by Pacifica Radio. And now back to the incredible testimonials, Japanese in California, from 1959.
The camp that I was in, it wasn't too bad. Partly because I think the administrator was a fairly decent guy. But it was split into the two camps of people who were very, very nationalistic and those who said that they would be in the army if they were called for. And petty things which went on between families who took these points on different points of view. They wouldn't talk to each other. And I think that was the most terrible period as far as I can remember, the confusion and animosity between people that were friends for years. And I remember the time my brother volunteered for this language specialty thing, and I lived in a block where there were a lot of people who felt that it was wrong, you know, how many times can you turn the other cheek sort of business. And they were very, very critical that my brother would do such a thing. The older people, they would come up and they would say very, very insulting things to my mother about the fact that how could you let your son go into the army. Well, I do remember, though, at the time that there were sons that were disowned by the family for having signed the loyalty oath or having joined the army. They were disowned. All of it's forgotten, but at the period, it was a very, very terrible, terrible time, because I remember some kids that I knew in camp at that time, and they were telling me that they thought that my brother was very fortunate to have a family that didn't make it so miserable for him.
The only incident that I recall very vividly is where it involved one family. They had 4 sons. The father, I believe, I suppose it didn't make too much difference to him, but the mother of the boys, she was definitely pro-Japanese, and as it turned out, the whole family was sent back to Japan, and she had that much, she exerted that much pressure on her sons and her husband. And the other incident that I can recall is where it involves a relation of mine, and he volunteered the minute Pearl Harbor was broadcasted, and it was accepted. And while in the service, I do recall we weren't in the same relocation center, but I do recall his mother and father telling us later how they were ostracized because their sons had volunteered.
I think the treatment of the Japanese during the war was, I would say, very miserable. I think it was inexcusable. Having lived among the Japanese until the time I was in service, I felt that there could be no question as to their loyalty to the country of their adoption, even in a crisis. perhaps it was because of the feelings of my mother and father and of my brothers and sisters and of my neighbors. But I felt that when the time came to decide, that they would decide for America and not for Japan. This isn't to say that in the negotiation period prior to the war that there wasn't among the older Japanese some feelings for Japan. But I feel sure that when the crucial decision had to be made between America and Japan, that the decision would have been in favor of America. Prior to Pearl Harbor, there was quite a lot of discussion among the Japanese, especially among the older Japanese, not too much among the younger ones. I think such discussions would have been in the nature that Japan needed to expand, that America was standing in her way of expansion, that Japan needed foodstuff and a marketplace for her goods. But I think such talk came because the older Japanese, though they've been in America quite a long time, weren't quite fully accepted in the American community, and so they had to feel that they belonged to some country. My mother, she had to sell her business at a fantastically low price, store other things, some of which were stolen, and she took only the minimum to the relocation center. I felt that she always looked upon Japan as the land of her birth and a land to which she must one day go back and visit. But I think because of her children, she felt that her allegiance lay with the United States. I don't think that it would be any exaggeration to say that the monetary loss among the Japanese prior to evacuation was very great. In many cases, I think they lost things which I think cannot be repaid financially. I think emotionally it was a tremendous experience for them. I think by now that if the experience hadn't been forgotten, the scars have long healed over. The country to which I belong was entitled to make a mistake. As long as it once righted that mistake in later years, it's good enough for me.
When the war was over, the Japanese could return to their homes and begin to pick up the threads of their lives. Many found new jobs and new places to live. Many had a difficult time readjusting. For none of them would life ever be the same as it was before the war.
The worst thing about how it happened was that it came so sudden. The government wasn't equipped to take care of property. People had stores, people had crops growing. I mean, all those kinds of things. There just wasn't time to take care of those kinds of things. So there was a tremendous loss in property, personal property. Although since the war we did work on an evacuation claims program, and the government did pass such a program, and most of the people have been given a token compensation for their losses. The amount was nowhere near what the losses actually were, because if you get uprooted from your home all of a sudden, you don't know exactly what you had in your home, when you bought it, how much it was worth, and all those things are involved, you see. And then when you come to business, things like goodwill, people had to hire non-Japanese to take over their business operations. When you've been in business for 20 years, what is the worth of goodwill and all those kinds of things which are intangibles, you see. And then you've been making so much per year, your records show it, but anticipated profits were knocked out of the evacuation claims bill.
I'm the editor of the English section of the Nichibei Times, the Japanese-American daily. We lost every piece of our equipment during the war. The company was dissolved, And we had to scrape up pieces here and there and reorganize completely mechanically and otherwise. It was quite a difficult thing to do at that time because well, Japanese type was, as you may figure, it was very scarce. And as far as the readership was concerned, we just had to wait until the people all came back. And as a paper, our circulation is much smaller than prior to the war. But
as much as, you know, just speaking very theoretically, I mean, we felt that our rights were violated and all that sort of thing, but I would say that this evacuation for the younger Japanese did a great deal. I mean, it killed our parents, however. I mean, that's the only thing about it. My father was never a very outspoken person, and he worked hard. He used to have to work 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week practically, with his little shop in Stockton. And but all I know is that when he had to sell out his shop and start packing to move, I think his well, his life just sort of slowed to a crawl. I mean, he had no reason to exist after that. You know, we were grown up and we didn't depend on him anymore, and I think he just, well, he just felt that there was no longer any reason for him to exist. He worked hard and he was healthy, so there's no reason why he wouldn't have, well, lived to be 70 or so on and so forth. But he died about 4 years ago.
If World War II forced the Japanese to leave the Pacific coast, it also forced thousands of Americans to go to Japan, first as conquerors, later as allies. Many of the Americans liked Japan, and some of them took Japanese brides. A few of these marriages did not work out, and lonely Japanese girls found themselves in a strange land, far from home, needing the services of a lawyer.
Probably handled maybe 100 or 150 cases, all told, on the war brides, and they come from different backgrounds. By and large, most of the cases I've handled for war brides involved mixed marriages, either between the war bride and a Caucasian, or the husband is usually either Caucasian or Negro, and once in a while, I've run into the problems of war brides where they've been married to Nisei or Chinese, but those are very exceptional. And most of the problems seem to stem from those families in which the husband is still in the service and there's separation, long periods of separation. A lot of them are referred to me because the language problem. I'm well enough versed in Japanese so that I can, it's much easier for most of the war brides to speak in Japanese, I mean, especially when they're consulting with an attorney. And sometimes there are agencies that know that I'm around. Sometimes it's a referral from one war bride to another. And sometimes it's a referral from another attorney who feels that he can't handle the situation because he has a language handicap. I would probably have a somewhat distorted view if I just looked at my files. I might conclude that these marriages were not, on the whole, successful. On the other hand, if you look at the statistics on the immigration or the immigration of war brides, Japan has a quota of 185 people who can come over here for permanent residence. The war brides are non-quota, and on the average, the immigration statistics show that there's been between 4,000 to 5,000 war brides coming into this country annually since about 1950. And I would say that roughly 1 out of every 6 person of Japanese ancestry in this country today is a war bride. So that if you weight my experience, and possibly I handle the vast majority of the domestic relations problems of the war brides in this area, I don't think that proportionately that it runs any worse than the population as a whole. Possibly it runs a better percentage, that is a lesser percentage, breakup of marriage. I've seen some situations where they've had nothing but misery since they've come here, but I guess because they have come from a background where they had seen much more adversity, that the worst situations that they have run into in this country are still better than the situations that they might face if they go back to Japan. And added to that, some of them feel that they have to stay here because they've entered into the marriage against parental wishes, and the village where they came from might have frowned upon a mixed marriage, and therefore that they would find a hostile home or a hostile community to go back to. In other instances, the war brides are more or less orphans to begin with, or they've lost their families, or they've lost contact with their families, or their families are very poor, so that the situation in Japan would be much worse. And another factor which makes them probably a little more adaptable to the type of adversity that they might run into here is the fact that most of the war brides were children during the war, and they never had the kind of easy childhood that most of us feel is ideal, or most of the children probably raised here are accustomed to, so that they went through childhood with many handicaps, and they're not used to. I mean, they don't expect that everything's going to be a bed of roses, I mean, in marriage or otherwise. And so their outlook is probably a little bit better from the standpoint of adjusting themselves to a foreign country, foreign languages, foreign customs, and a marriage which probably is less than ideal from the type of dream marriages that we concoct.
It's kind of lonely because since we left my folks, from Japan in a new country, but since I married a Japanese American, my husband is a Nisei, what you call, so his friends is all Japanese, and his folks are Japanese, so I didn't feel much left out because everything is very familiar to me, since food is, we can still eat Japanese food, and around my folks is Japanese. One thing, when I started looking the job, and right after I came over, that's because if I found a job among the American, my English getting better much faster. That's what I decided to work a little bit. Then I went to agency and all over to look around job, but they asked me about American citizenship first, and so that thing is almost like I found a job and then you don't have American citizenship, so I can't give you a job. That thing is makes me discouraged. Well, that can be helped because I can get my citizenship at least 3 years, so that at that time I didn't have it, Otherwise, I really didn't have much bad time.
There are many minority groups in America, and most of them have formed associations to protect their rights. The organization of the Japanese is the JACL, the Japanese American Citizens League.
I was one of the founders of the JACL in San Francisco way back, and it was, even then it was very hard to get started in those days because the ISA were quite pro-Japanese at that time, and they didn't like the idea of us organizing citizens group. In fact, one of the first group was organized in Fresno, and they called themselves the American Loyalty League. And then Seattle had a group called the Progressive Citizens League, and we were the first ones to form under the Japanese American Citizens League. We've organized that in San Francisco. Saburo Kido, who was a big man JCL, and some of us got together and organized the JCL. I served as president 2 or 3 times, and we really had a very lowly start. Well, the ISA couldn't join anyhow, but a lot of them tried to prevent their sons and daughters from coming in at that time. Well, a lot of them were bitter because they weren't able to get citizenship, and there was a lot of prejudice. So they felt that as long as we were treated as orphans, why should we be loyal to this country? But that attitude has changed an awful lot since. This was by the way back in 29 or 30, around there. We had a very difficult time getting that thing started. I remember Kido and I just alternated presidency there for 5 or 6 years before it would take hold.
I was one of these bright little intellectual liberal types, let's put it this way. So to actually go out with someone from a minority group was a little different from talking about it with people. And I think all of a sudden I became conscious that maybe we couldn't go here or we couldn't go there. And I'd never had to think about this before, you know. And I sort of had the feeling in the back of my mind that I would never really get involved with this man, you know. Very nice guy, I'll talk to him, he'll be a good friend. And I really felt quite sure that this was going to be just a friendship, you know. And I think I never spelled it out to myself, but I had a definite feeling that this was a closed-off relationship. I think in some ways I felt a lot, sharpened up a lot more than I used to be about who I want to know, who my friends are. I'm much more aware of what people think about Negroes, Orientals, mixed marriages. You know, before, since I was one of the big white majority, it didn't matter. You know, you talk to these people all the time, and you might disagree with them, but you're one of them, kind of. But I think that the only thing that happened since I've been married is this feeling of I'm no longer one of this majority. You know, I'm sort of, I have another loyalty, kind of, and I find myself not wanting to know people I might not have even cared about how they thought before. And now I just sort of have a stronger feeling about this. I don't want them for friends. Some funny things have happened with, the baby. Just little tiny things, and I don't think that she'll run into any real trouble. At the co-op the other day, somebody looked at Kimi and said, "Oh, isn't she a polite baby?" This kind of thing, you know. But they're going to be pretty kids. You know, I think that all of our kids would be very good-looking kind of kids. And this helps. Just to be pretty helps, you know, in this world. You know, so I think some other funny things like this neighbor down the street kind of thing that happens, where because another person and I are in the same group, or they identify with me, you know, you're okay, and it gives them an in to look at this curiosity that is our marriage, you know. And this is just a feeling you get from people of this particular kind, you know. This sort of being in the house and, oh, there he is again, you know. And looking at you sort of more closely, like, what's this all about? If they have a party, it's nice that they can sort of show off their interracial friends or something like this, you know.
Issei, Nisei, Sansei. 3 generations of Japanese Americans, with the 4th already on its way. Some of them remember the language of their parents. Some of them hold to the ancient religion. But most of them have become much more American than Japanese.
I think I could say this, that as far as my work is concerned, with the people I work with, co-workers and clients, that I think it's very easy to forget that I am a Japanese American. I find myself every once in a while thinking about, my goodness, I'm treated like anybody else, and I think, well, my God, I'm not really biracial features and all that, an American, I mean, so-called American. I'm an Oriental, but it doesn't seem to bother anybody, and it doesn't bother me as much as it did a long time ago.
I mean, I don't go to the Buddhist church regularly, but I feel that I'm still Buddhist. I belong to the Buddhist church. And my mother is in town, so I speak to her in as much Japanese as I can muster. And they do have Japanese movies, and I rarely go, but they are available. And I don't think there's any strong tie as such, and I don't think the Japanese community as such exists as it used to, as it did in the past.
Kind of a peculiar feeling, like when I'm with Japanese Americans, then I feel like I'm thinking like an American. And yet when I'm with the non-Japanese, then I feel like I have to take a certain kind of position and a certain kind of stand because I'm Japanese American. It's kind of a funny feeling.
And that does it for this week's From the Vault. We'd like to say a special thank you to Addie Gevins for helping us with this series being preserved and represented to the Pacifica Network listeners. We are now streaming and podcasting online at fromthevaultradio.org. Thanks to all the Pacifica station listeners who joined our summer school campus campaign and sponsored more schools with the From the Vault series. For more information, call the archives at 1-800-735-0230 or visit us online at pacificaradioarchives.org. From the Vault is presented as part of the Pacifica Radio Archives Preservation and Access Project, which is supported in part by an award from the National Endowment for the Arts and past grants from the Grammy Foundation and the American Archive Pilot Project funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. This program was written and produced by Mark Torres and Brian DeShazer. The series is executive produced by the Pacifica Radio Archives and your host, Brian DeShazer. Our theme music is by Kevin Drum Holiday. Thanks for listening.